Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Smudcast number 796, How Psychopaths Hijacked the Gaming Industry. That's an interesting title. This is from MentisWave. Came out about, what is this? Oh, June, just last month. So has almost 75,000 views. Is 40 minutes long. So I doubt we'll get through all of this today. And if it's worthwhile, we'll keep going, but like another day. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I'm assuming
I haven't seen this one yet. I have a bit of a backlog on Mentis as on some of the others because, well, life.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect in terms of the arguments, but if it's going to be about game journalism, we got decades of examples of how game journalism has, I wouldn't say degraded, but just been crap. It's always been crap for the past 10 or so years at least. So, like, I remember back in the 90s when it was just, you had to find it. You had to go hunting for it in Nintendo Power magazines or Wizard magazines or all kinds of other magazines.
Or Game Informer or EGM.
Yeah, I remember some Game Informer. Sometimes they came with a free game, like a CD attached to them, and you'd try it out. But, yeah,
I hear GameStar still lives and does dabble in actual games journalism once in a while.
Yeah, I can confirm.
You know GameStar?
A little bit of it. No, I haven't looked too much into that.
What is it? I had them subscribed when I was a kid, and well, after I moved out, I didn't continue that because, well, money is short. So I kind of fell out with that magazine. But I think it was last year when a coverage about the then new Settlers game came out, and it was scathing because Settlers was a all-time favorite of GameStar, and they still have some of the original crew there that do genre-specific games journalism. Like, they know what they're talking about and can say, well, that game was good in the series, that was shit, that was good, that was shit, that was good, that was shit, and so on. And point out what is just a crappy moneymaker. And that is what's missing. It's not about ideology, it's about, is it a good game?
Well, the magazines that I bought, like Nintendo Power, it wasn't just reviews of games, it was tips, it was comics, it was some editorials, lots of maps. It was all kinds of fun stuff. And it felt like if you and a bunch of gamers from the 90s who liked not necessarily Nintendo, but the games that Nintendo were popping out, not as a primary publisher, but as a tertiary publisher. So other companies would come in and they'd talk about those games too. It felt like just fans of the game, and they would talk about it. It was great. It was just a simple, fun kids magazine. So I thought it was high quality. And
to mention EGM, they also had their famous or infamous April Fool's gags that they would do, like the all bonds code for GoldenEye, which turned out to be fake. And then I think in EGM 2, their second magazine, they spawned the much more infamous Akuma in Resident Evil 2 gag.
Okay.
So that whole era, like it goes along with what you're saying. That whole era of like all the magazines, like doing that kind of fun stuff, as well as providing that content.
Just question for understanding: was Nintendo Power an independent magazine, or was it Nintendo's in-house magazine in America?
I think it was in-house.
I believe it was, in-house.
Because
here that was called Club Nintendo magazine, and while it was good advertisement, that of course could not criticize much of Nintendo's own products.
Oh yeah, I remember it came with like a poster, like in the middle of the magazine, and it was a poster of like an advertisement from the TV ads of Zelda. It was like, oh wow, they took an actual whatever still or actor, and they did a specific thing. So obviously they had insider data that no one else would have. So anyway,
sadly that at least in Germany, I don't know about other countries, that magazine died here when people were canceling it and not even picking it up from the store anymore, when Nintendo demanded that 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of it be Pokemon.
What?
It was just Pokemon every month,
Oh.
the whole magazine,
Yeah.
and then it's just like, why am I picking this up? This is not fun anymore.
Yeah, we had come Nintendo over here too. Basically, the same thing happened.
All right. Well, that was print media back in the 90s and early 2000s, I assume. Yeah. Okay. So 40 minutes of games journalism and video games. Okay, here we go.
Remember what they took from you?
Man, that controller.
Hey internets, so there's an interesting thing about mainstream gaming journalism, which is that if you were to jump into a time machine and go back anywhere between 2 to 4 decades, roughly between the 1980s and early 2000s, there's something there that you're going to find in most gaming magazines that is largely absent from mainstream gaming journalism you'll find online today, which is that these magazines almost exclusively talk about, well, video games. And not only that, but they're actually pretty darn interesting. Now fortunately, you don't actually have to jump into a time machine to do this, anybody can check it out for themselves. There's actually
Yeah,
a
still have a
website
stack
that
of
lets you
that
download a
on
lot of
the-
old gaming
on the
magazines
roof.
from these times and read them. What you'll find is that articles were largely written pretty fairly and were very interesting to read and kept politics and ideology largely out aside from the extremely rare obscure joke. The writing style was about video games for video gamers. And one of the reasons
Yeah, because not even the coverage of Command and Conquer Red Alert talked in any way about communism. Talked about the gameplay and the units and maybe the humor and the amazing music by Frank Klepacki.
Yeah, it was actual coverage. Who would have thought?
for this is you could see that the articles were actually being written by people who were also gamers. And that's not all. Even the advertisements in these magazines are pretty darn interesting and give you a decent idea of what the feel of the game is going to be. And the reviews tend to focus largely on the gameplay and what you were getting for your money. The idea of a gaming review back then focusing on whether or not the game subscribes to the correct ideology or has the correct moral opinions, trademark, was almost completely unheard of. In addition to this, gaming journalism used to include a lot of useful cheat codes and tips in regards to games that were almost impossible to find otherwise. They also included various detailed walkthroughs that had visualizations that were, you know, actually useful and actually comprehensive, and again, written by people who clearly took the time to go through everything and find all the
Like things as in Baldur's Gate 2, where there's that one mage character that can join your party, or is it a sorcerer? That is trapped in a specific location where you need the freedom or whatever spell it is, because the magical prison he's in, which is a spell you can use on enemies, is imprisoned under the ground, and there's no indication for it. Maybe there were hints about in a quest line, but I never got to that point. But things like that being in there to show you, hey, here's secret content. That was just nice to scroll through. The problem is that today you don't just do this anymore. Just like you don't just watch what's on the television because everything can be on demand. But since everything can be on demand, it's less likely that you come across and just make time for something you haven't seen yet, some old classic or something. And that's pretty much the same thing. And this whole cultural shift through media and how we get to know what actually is out there, I think we're losing something that way. Does that make sense?
Anyway,
I'm trying to grasp exactly what to say about that, but you can get game guides for anything nowadays very quickly, and multiple websites dedicated just to that, sometimes before the game is released. So
yeah, everything now seems to be, oh, watch this video about this thing, and then like, maybe I don't want to watch videos.
the point is, you can tell by reading it that it's clearly made for gamers by gamers. I remember enjoying reading a lot of these back in the 1990s. and I decided to reread a lot of them recently just to see if it was just the nostalgia talking or not. And as it turns out, it's not nostalgia. The writing back then was just overall better quality, and most importantly, stayed on topic. This is unfortunately in stark contrast to what we see today. Snap back to the present, and a lot of video game journalism looks like, well, whatever the heck this thing is supposed to be. No, seriously, what is this garbage? Did someone get confused on whether they wanted to make a publication about gaming, or about yoga instruction and positive affirmations, or whatever the current normie feel-good buzzwords happen to be? Where are the walkthroughs? Where are the tips and tricks? Where are the actual secrets that a gamer might have trouble finding? Where's the, well, anything at all that a gamer might care about? Seriously, this is complete, total garbage. Where did the good stuff go? And you might be able to
I just see
forgive them just
leftist
a little bit,
buzzwords.
because again, of course, today is...
I'm not even sure what that website or articles were. What was that? I've never heard of that.
Just buzzwords aimed at women.
It looked like corporate speak. I was like, what is this?
Yeah. That's all it usually is.
In modern times,
it's
of course,
indistinguishable
you can
from
just
each
Google
other.
it and find tips, tricks, and walkthroughs and whatnot on places like GameFAQs. Overall, it's actually a lot easier to find this stuff these days than in the past. But that doesn't excuse them for being terrible at the one thing that's left, which is largely just editorials. Which these days in modern gaming journalism, usually the topic will start out with gaming, but it will often quickly go off topic from there, often talking about things that no gamer should give the slightest crap about, or reviewing games based on whether or not they have the correct ideology rather than whether or not their game is actually good. Then further interjections are made by these random shaky allegations against certain studios for sexism, racism, bigotry, and what.
And that all these things, like Kotaku that you just mentioned, now completely crash after the artificial money injections are over, just tells that nobody was actually clicking on them. I don't think anyone was reading these things.
There was only...
I want to point this out. The developer of that upcoming game, Black Myth Wukong, the developers of that game are actively, and I mean actively, against the woke crap.
Mm-hmm.
They have refused to bend the knee, and they got their offices, at least the front of their office, like trashed because of.
I think the only
by a Chinese feminist. I don't understand how that is even a thing.
I don't know how that can even exist. I was just about to say.
I think the only journalist from Kotaku that I would respect for the articles he released, not necessarily his opinions, but his insider information behind the scenes at a lot of these game companies, was Jason Schreier. But he stopped working there, so we can get him from, I think, The Guardian or wherever he works now. So that's where I got a lot of background info on like BioWare and other companies, why Andromeda was the way it was, what happened to Anthem. So that's good. Like that's an actual journalist who happens to be in gaming and have a lot of contacts and he knows what's going on. His actual opinions, they suck. And you could go to what's that, Forbes. Forbes is considered a right-leaning organization, but they have like this guy called Eric Kane.
There are so many.
Yeah.
There are so many pure socialist propaganda articles on Forbes that are pro-DEI and such that I have trouble believing that.
Yeah, Eric Kane, like he's changed over the years, but he's still this lame brain. And I've covered him on the channel years ago and multiple times. Like he was saying the fourth season of the Boys, I think is bad, but for stupid reasons, like the dumbest reasons. And it's all about sex. It's all about, this is bad against women. It's like, no, it's The Boys has always been about shock value. That's not the thing. Eric,
the whole sex thing was last season already, where you have the full screen image of the front of a penis that a miniature man walks into. Yeah.
Well, one of the jokes was, I think, that their version of Batman, but he's like a pervert, and I'm just like, that's nothing new. We've seen that.
Everyone on that show is a pervert.
Yeah, I'm like, this is nothing. Because they have a GIMP guy, and that's the Robin, and they urinate on him. And I was like, yeah.
And that's the entire joke of the show, that where how it's a bad imitation of Watchmen, because Watchmen is about. Is more grounded. It has real corruption in it. It has real flaws of humanity. The Boys is just, here's a sex joke.
Here's a guy exploding because it'd be funny. I don't know.
Because of sex.
I've never really watched The Boys. I've seen clips, and I know that the current season is just trash.
Don't bother.
First season is watchable.
And the criticism is just bad. Like he'll say certain things, and he'll like I showed you maybe from the roundups of the Dragon Age 2 weeks ago. The journalist talking about Dragon Age, and his take was like, no one should be complaining about blah 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 females. It's like, well, why not? Why can't we talk about the women in stories that suck or are good or whatever? We can complain about having everyone be not bisexual but pansexual. It's like, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean?
I mean,
And it comes.
what
It always
does it mean?
comes from the.
I was going to say, what does it mean? It's the same thing.
And it always comes. Now the authoritarian insistence, the demand that, oh, you shouldn't complain about this or that, comes from the very people who, for decades, if not it being their entire livelihood, is to complain about absolutely everything.
Well, it's funny because
to the point of grieving being oppressive.
The obvious response to that is, well, the developers are being lazy, like they were smashing together Dragon Age 2, because why focus on a character's actual desire and making them a unique thing, and it's only a certain mentality, a certain sexuality, a certain whatever, because they don't have time. The game was finished in a year and 6 months or whatever, and now we have the same. I think we have the same scenario with the next Dragon Age. Anyway, that's off topic.
Yeah. Well, what is to say about Kotaku and Schreier? There was information to get from him. Good, but that's all. And if that is the only guy on the whole thing, then that's less than a fig leaf.
Yeah, Anthony Garaguglia, I think whatever his name is. He was on Kotaku. Yeah. He was on the Mary Sue. He was on a few others that are just trash rag websites. And this is a guy who's pursuing the truth. It's like, no, not if you're publishing under those guys. So anyway,
yeah, the thing, all these things were propped up because they're all artificial, with no true audience. Is to create facts to make it look. It's astroturfing, effectively. It's to make it look like there is a big movement and a big demand for this type of content, for these opinions, to then put pressure on game developers to make them believe they need to make this stuff. This is part of this whole culture war strategy to take everything over, to push the propaganda into everything. It can't come naturally because it is unnatural.
All right. Here's Vladimir Dragunov. Thank you, sir, for being a member for 29 months. Invincible Comics is just the boys' comics, but actually better in a way. Some of the same mature content, I would say. So that's fine, but definitely a different delivery method and different storytelling method. Anyway,
I didn't get around to the comic, but the show has changes, and they're very woke.
Usually come with very little to no evidence, other than the fact that a journo is saying so, and therefore we're supposed to pretend that it's automatically true. The point here is, game journalists in the modern era could be forgiven over the fact that they only focus on editorials due to how the internet works, if those editorials were actually good. But they're not. It's complete and total garbage. And there have been a lot of scandals recently that people have been talking about in regards to this subject. Subjects like Gamergate 2 and the Sweet Baby incident, or various game journalist publications all consolidating into one publication, because hey, they all have the exact same opinions anyway, so why not just fuse? As well as stories of blatant extortion, and studios being forced to include DEI standards and woke propaganda in their games, lest they be hit with bad press and general poor coverage, all because they refuse to bend the knee. And the truth is that all of these takes that people have been having lately, and all of the scandals that have been happening, are all a part of an overarching problem. So in this video, I'm going to go over the problems of gaming journalism in the gaming industry over the years, explain how this disastrous mess came to be, as well as going over solutions that anyone can choose to be a part of. Because the unfortunate truth here is that all these recent videos about Gamergate 2, Sweet Baby Inc., woke ideological takeover, biased journalism, and low-quality games are in fact all components of a cancerous tumor that has been infecting and killing video games journalism, and to a much degree, the entire gaming industry as a whole.
Yeah, and the short of the solution is very simple. Don't believe their lies. Don't take the bait, which is the money. Don't let them emotionally extort you with their shaming tactics and whatnot. Just power through, make your game the way you want it, the way you think it's good, and it'll be a success.
Well,
it will definitely be more of a success than when you listen to them.
Even with the Alana Pierce video, and she did not a rebuttal, but a continuation talking about accessibility, and it's still a pile of corporate gobbledygook. No one actually takes that stuff seriously. Everything she was talking about has nothing to do with the game or accessibility options. You could look at a Google Play video on the topic of the similar like categories she showed of like holding your baby. That's in relation to holding a cell phone in the other hand. Can you design an app so that one person who has an actual disability or partial disability or temporary one and a situational disability, the effect is the same? Not an earthquake occurs. How do you program around that? It's like, no, Alana, that's not how things operate.
What insane mother plays video games while holding her baby?
Well, no. The example for Google Play was you have touch, you have vision, you have hearing, you have all these things that could be impaired in a situation. But it doesn't matter because this is within the basis of a mobile device and how you interact. Like, say it's dark outside, can you have a voice support? Like, there's things that programmers can do. But outside of getting a proprietary hardware for people who are already blind or deaf or whatever, this is outside the scope of what a job of a developer is or a designer of the software. So all this talk about, well, what if I'm a parent? What if my house blows up? What if the power gets cut? It's like, it doesn't matter. And
it's not the job of the developer.
And if
that's your problem for not growing a third arm or cloning yourself.
And if she thinks this is what she does, like, we really think hard about all this crap. It's like, no, you don't. There is no way a dev team or a design team who are all coders go, yeah, we should. What if the power goes out? It's like, we have backups. Our servers are always up. Who cares? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and if we look at what, and as is especially the case with woke developers, that they misdesign their games visually or with effects in such a way that they don't even give a shit about epileptic effects, as was the case with Galactica, where if you hit with an asteroid, the screen shakes so hard that it is similar to the screen flashes that induce migraine and epileptic seizures.
They do have warnings, but they don't change it.
The warning doesn't do shit. Most games that put the warning before don't trigger epileptic effects that much or at all, because they're actually well designed with that in mind. But many woke games just don't care, just as many left-wing movie productions, like J.J. Abrams, the ninth Star Wars episode with Exegol. That is just strobe lights. That was in the trailer. I remember watching the trailer in the cinema. I don't remember what movie I ran afterwards because I just had a migraine for the rest of the night. And there's similar things when the Eclipse went from whoever made it prior to Amazon. Before, they could make really good light effects. Went to Amazon, full screen light flashes, because that's cheap effects. And I thought, like, what the fuck is this crap? Does the show want to kill me? I don't know. The left doesn't care about epilepsy at all. And we know this in Germany very definitely from the bicycle, the cyclists, which they all vote the Green Party. And they don't give a shit about their strobe light bicycle lights that if they just push them slowly are strobe lights. And it's a traffic hazard, but they don't care. And if you talk to them about it, they get this shit-eating grin. They actually like inducing pain. It's horrible. They don't bother turning it off because it doesn't affect them. Therefore, it doesn't matter. Because if it doesn't affect them and they would have to change something, they won't, because that's effort. they do care about all the virtue signaling crap, because virtue signaling you can do without actually doing something. They want to be perceived as good, but they are not good.
All right.
And that's the same with the misappropriation of this whole term of trigger warnings.
All right, we are 5 minutes in. I don't know what's happening on screen. I've sort of forgot what he was talking about. Something does not look right in the world. Anyway.
For quite some time now. So what you are about to watch here is the story of how this beloved industry has become infected with narcissistic, woke, ideologically driven activists who've abused legal and financial power dynamics in order to force their way into gaming and pervert it from within, resulting in the trash fire of corruption and rot we see today. Or in simpler terms, this is the story of how gaming has been twisted into far-left propaganda.
My language.
But before I get into that, let me just state that this video is not sponsored by anyone, and will likely end up earning limited ad revenue due to the fact that I will be stating things that, while demonstrably true, go heavily against certain established narratives. So if you wish to support me, I'm currently holding a limited time sale for the 2 shirts on my merch store that are relevant to this video. I've also created some sweet mug versions for people who wish to be more discreet. Alternatively, you can support me on Ko-Fi or Subscribestar, or for those of you who don't have any money, no worries, feel free to subscribe and just enjoy the video. And I'm going to start this off with the big guns. The primary cause of how gaming journalism has destroyed its credibility and the reason why its current state should be regarded as entirely fraudulent. And this reason is the unfortunate fact that mainstream game journal publications over time have replaced, or in some cases converted, the journalists who were actually gamers with journos who are little more than prestige-seeking cathedralites. And of course the immediate question is, what the heck is a prestige?
He's going to probably answer what you're,
whoa.
wondering at.
Yeah.
A cathedralite is, the cathedral is a term used for the ideology itself, the overarching, and therefore its priests and prophets, the propagandists, well, that's the term for them. Because they're not journalists, they're propagandists. And the socialist term always was agitation and propaganda.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union and East Germany had ministries of agitation and propaganda. The short term was agitprop.
I cannot see a specific reviewer or an editor of a website having prestige. There's maybe one guy or 2 guys I might have liked, like a certain reviewer or a certain editor way back in the day, like RPGFan.net or whatever, that I was like, I can't wait to hear what he has to say. That's about it. Like, there's no real prestige in doing your job as a...
I think the prestige that most of them see is mainly in their heads. They're in this working for this website. They get paid ludicrous amounts of money for what they do. And once they don't get that acknowledgement anymore by their thing being shut down because money is gone, that's when they notice the magical made-up prestige going away, or it is these really deranged people like Alyssa McCante or these other types, or Anita Sarkeesian, who are seeking the public renown. They're looking for the cheers.
Compare
from
that
the crowd
to like the biggest guy I could think of is Jeff Knightley, or whatever his name is, Jeff Naley. The guy who does the Game Awards, like he used to be a journal. He was the Doritos Pope.
Jeff Keighley.
Was it Keighley? I thought it was Knightley. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it is Keighley.
Yeah, like he's just a big name that got really big for I don't know, interviews, getting insider information to the point where he could host his own award show. It's like, no one cares. Do your job. We don't really give a shit about your opinion about this or that Xbox exclusive. Like no one gives a shit. So it's not what it used to be. E3 is a thing of the past. So all these big extravaganzas, no one cares. Like the gamers don't really care. Yeah, it's fun to see a cool trailer released as a premiere, but no, we honestly can get it on streaming, or we can get it on YouTube and watch it later. Not a big deal.
Seeking cathedralite. So let's go over that, because this is actually the most important concept that is needed to be able to grasp, specifically how the gaming industry became twisted into this propaganda.
That's a wonderful picture.
The term prestige-seeking cathedralite comes from Curtis Yarvin's idea of the cathedral, which is this observation of this interesting mystery that the modern world's and prestigious intellectual institutions, even though they have no central organizational connection, behave in many ways as if they were a single organizational structure.
Okay, fair enough. But I would argue what Whisp might argue about anyone against the ideology is therefore the enemy. So everyone thinks exactly the same way, because if you disagree, they just think of you as nothing. So,
yeah, but that is just the same thing explained from the other direction. It comes to the same point.
Yeah, but I like yours because it's actually about Marxism. It's actually about the argument, not the manifestation of academia or games journalism. It's just literally Marxism. It's like, yeah, just say what it is. It's the Marxist dialectic. That's all it is. And if you're against the revolution, you're the enemy.
In a lot of it functions. Nick, go.
Yeah, the cathedral isn't really like specifically Marxist. It's just one environment that they can create where an ideology they like can thrive. That's essentially the idea.
Right. And they call us, like, what is it, reactionaries, even though we thought that was, well, we watched your video and reacting to it, therefore we're like, nothing to do with that.
That's the naive definition. The real definition is always the naive definition. Because the Marxists and whatever else you want to call them, they always use an esoteric definition. Esoteric just means secret or inner circle. In this case, it's magic. It's the secret magic knowledge and the hidden knowledge, and that is their own definitions are always different from the actual definitions. When they say reactionary, they mean specifically in reaction and opposition to any socialist cause, because they have because socialism is the attempt to accelerate history towards utopia. Therefore, the right side of history is, of course, to help history speed up so that we get to utopia faster. And since in utopia everything's perfect, it is completely justified to walk over a lot of corpses, Griffith style.
Yeah, it's always an ist, it's always an ism.
Yeah, and therefore, just to finish this up, the wrong side of history is any opposition, any non-acceleration of history, and that's the reactionary in their definition. Because, and further to go one step before that, they anthropomorphize history into having an intent and a purpose and a goal as if it's conscious, and that history so that's why history moves towards utopia, and that history uses and discards people. And that is why they have no trouble using demographics that they then betray and discard, like the workers, the women, the gays, the blacks, the whoever else. This is their modus operandi. And one thing about this specifically, that how this cathedral comes to be, is a lot there was, I think it was shortly after the war, I keep forgetting the year, there was in Germany a cross-party congress of all the left-wing parties, with the Social Democrats, with the Communist Party, and all of that other nonsense. And there they decreed a couple very interesting things. One of them was the very strategy to call every opponent to socialism, and that's whether it's social democracy or communism, all the worst names in the book, to slander, to discredit, to shame, and that's all the words of Nazi and racist and fascist. Reactionary would be the softest, and over the years they just added more, like sexist and transphobe and homophobe and Islamophobe and all the other phobes and ists. And that's where we are. That's where that comes from. The thing is, no socialists today, except for a few maybe that know the history, know about this collective decision from that party congress. They just do it because it's through rapport. They copy the behavior of the group and see this works. so they keep doing it. So it becomes a natural behavior of the whole movement, and that is the same with many of these other aspects of the ideology, and that's how you get this insubstantial cathedral that operates but isn't a centralized thing. You just inject pro-ideology stuff in it, and it naturally suffuses through the whole thing through osmosis. You have some centralized things in there, like organizations like Socialist International and the Progressive Alliance that coordinate all the left-wing parties worldwide. You can look them up on Wikipedia and read their member lists. The Democrat Party of the US is part of the Progressive Alliance, for example. I think they were part of Socialist International around 2009, but I don't remember the exact year. It was just for a short time because it was just too obvious being a member of that. And that is just a part of the international socialist movement, the International, that was not founded, but also taken over by Marx and all these other crazy people to create this world socialism. Because before they were called internationalists, then they were called socialists, then communists, or was more or less the same thing. They made an artificial distinction. And now the term is globalists. Progressives is somewhere in between. Right, that was also a thing they decided at that cross-party congress back then to refer to themselves publicly as progressives, because that's progress, naive definition, naive understanding. Oh, it's for good things, to make things better. When really it means progress of the purpose of history to go to utopia, which means we probably need to genocide you. That's the insanity of it all.
All right, let's get back to games before I hurt myself.
Or in other words, this mystery of how a lot of journalist and academic institutions, despite being decentralized, seem to behave as if it's all one big giant echo chamber circle jerk. And the reason this happens is because of ideological capture. It's not called the cathedral to try and insult the Catholic Church, but rather it's just a reference to the phenomenon that happens if, say, one becomes the primary ideology of said intellectual institutions. Especially if said ideology is extremely dogmatic and extremely intolerant towards competing ideologies. What happens if such an
Just call it Marxism. We know exactly what you're talking about. It's fine.
ideology becomes dominant is that people who do not bend the knee to that ideology are ultimately kicked out of the institutions, because what they said is immediately deemed to be wrongthink trademark. This also creates an incentive for the people who wish to stay within those institutions to make sure that they are only publishing work that aligns with said correct
yeah, don't read that. That's a pile of nonsense.
opinions. Or in other words, in order to seek prestige within their institution or to increase their rank, they must ensure that whatever they're saying or whatever they're writing always aligns with the correct think trademark opinions trademark from said dogmatic ideology. Now, in the context of today, that ideology happens to be the cult of woke, which comes from the idea that a lack of diversity and equity inclusion implies that something unfair or nefarious has happened, and far-left activists will use this to justify their agenda. It also includes envy and hatred directed at groups that are deemed to be successful, because again, the lack of DEI must be their fault, as those groups are somewhat ironically collectively accused of discrimination. This provides an immediate explanation for why the games industry in the West reached a boiling point a little over a decade ago, where they suddenly hated you if you were a straight white male. Straight men are perceived to be on top of the progressive stack, and thus, in accordance to how woke ideology justifies punching upwards, this created a justification for forcibly reducing their numbers.
I'm too white, guy.
Yeah.
You need to get a tan.
It's a justification for because we have judged you as being on the very top, therefore we must discriminate against you so hard that you want to off yourself.
Okay, that's... Oy.
And at the same time, they tell us, look at this article. And at the same time, they keep telling us that, oh no, there is no racism against the whites. There is no sexism against the men. It's all in your head. You're a conspiracy theorist. It's just gaslighting.
I'm not seeing a problem if mainstream gaming has 51% white males, that game developers make games for those people. I just don't see the problem with that.
Maybe it's just because most game developers come out of European, Eastern European, American, and Japanese countries.
South Korean. Yeah, they're all like, let's make fun shit that's really cool to look at. Like, yep, let's do it.
Yeah, and with the Asian game makers, you have Asian characters most of the time. Okay, you also have Mario. We have Link. They're not. What is Link? Link is a Hylian. That's not. He's not white. He's some elf dude.
He's a flat sprite in some cases.
He might be Asian. Like sometimes he looks Asian, sometimes he looks more European. What gives? And if you let Africa grow some more, develop some more, there are some countries that are a bit more developed. They tend to be not socialist for some reason, and that leads to their development, strangely enough. You give them some more time, they make their own games, and they probably have black characters in them, and they'll be fun to play, and they'll have interesting stories where they use their own mythology and not in this horrible, actually appropriated way that the woke people do. There's this one game they pushed. I'm not talking about the Yaska game with Assassin's Creed, but which is completely a cultural garbage. But there was this other thing where they did listen to Sweet Baby Inc. and replaced everything with Africans protagonists.
It was a side scroller, right?
And no, one of these adventure battle type games with Dark Soulsy battle.
Oh, really? Huh.
And it's probably gonna tank just because. Oh, you listen to the DEI crap. We don't want you anymore.
I do know there was a side scroller game based off a bunch of black cultural things, and I don't know what happened to it. I thought it was coming out this year, and Sweet Baby was involved, but I don't recall. Anyway.
This is especially noticeable because the largest demographic of people who identify as hardcore gamers tend to be, again, straight men, which the Cult of Woke, again, of course, views as a toxic element that has to be removed. And thus the justification was put in place for gamers to be replaced by prestige seekers. The prestige-seeking cathedralites we see today are thus the people who are willing to put...
That's a bit of a stretch. We're just talking about game journalists here, not these weirdos that are all over the place just for these specific games.
And bow down to this ideology or cult of woke in order to maintain their prestige within the industry. That has essentially become dominated by woke ideology. Whether they actually believe in this ideology or not is irrelevant, as due to the intolerant nature of wokeness, they're forced to bow down in order to just honestly keep their jobs.
There are a lot of opportunists in the ideology.
Some of them are true believers, but all of them are prestige-seeking cathedralites. Or you pretty much have to be one in order to get in with the in crowd in this industry these days. This is why all these game journalist publications all seem to have the same opinions, and why so many games designed today in the West tend to have the same boring, predictable, woke, activist-infused plot lines. It is simply the result of the fact that in order to be successful in this industry these days, they have to be prestige seekers within the cathedral of wokeness. One important thing to understand that this is not a conspiracy theory. Rather, this is just a logical, mathematically inevitable conclusion of what happens when an intolerant ideology becomes the dominant ideology within any kind of institution. It is simply a result of the fact that anybody who resists that ideology will get kicked out until they're...
Yeah, at the very top, you have the Stalin, Trotsky, Schwab types.
There's basically except true believers and people who are at least willing to pretend to be true believers. However, one thing a lot of people get wrong about the decentralized gatekeeping that the cathedral does is that it's not inherently a bad thing. Sometimes this kind of intolerance is entirely justified. For instance, it makes perfect logical sense for an intellectual academic institution to be intolerant towards people who are low IQ, or those who show a consistent lack of intellectual integrity, or fraudsters who publish papers with fake data. A good intellectual institution that wants to remain good obviously must do its best to expunge incompetent individuals. The problem here is that woke ideology does exactly the opposite of this. Because it views disproportionate group success as a sign of a great sin of discrimination and seeks to replace that group, the woke cathedral of today is inherently kakistocratic, which means that it ends up placing the least intelligent and most dishonest people in charge.
What is this word?
What? You never heard of kakistocracy?
When I studied politics, like Plato's 5 regimes, no. It's
well, you won't get it from Plato.
No, you won't get it from the Greeks either. This is
the kakistocracy is the worst possible government made up of the worst possible people. It is
democracy.
No, the people's government would be that. Democracy is just above that.
Okay.
a democracy can very easily turn into a people's government, which is a kakistocracy because it's done by cultish people's leaders who charm the populace into giving them what they want. That's where you get the dear leaders from in socialism, whether that's Stalin or Hitler.
So
a similar word from music would be cacophony.
Okay,
as an antonym to symphony.
The premise is that you have all these leaders who are just a bunch of religious nut jobs spouting crap. That's what it sounds like, as opposed to...
It's the most corrupt and most incompetent people.
Yeah, so like an oligarchy of the opposite of philosopher kings, but just religiously ordained. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, the oligarchy by the most virtuous people, the most competent and most virtuous people, would be an aristocracy. That would be the actual aristocracy.
Yeah,
Everything that is not based on virtue would be the oligarchy.
That's why I said this isn't inherently a communist thing.
Yeah, and because the worst people sneak themselves to power through all these sinister means. Tidbit on the side: the German word for shit is Kacke. It's related to the Latin one.
Well, yeah, it's probably a Latin Greek word. I never heard of it before. But
so your life has been completed.
Oh yeah, I learned a new word for another form of government I never want to hear about again. Yeah, that's great.
As a reporter, the people who are willing to lie and stretch the truth and say stupid things in favor of DEI and Marxist propaganda are the ones who gain prestige, while people who call out the logical inconsistencies of this ideology ultimately are not granted prestige and are, in many cases, shoved out. So that just brings up the question for the next section of this video. How in the heck did this happen? Well, the first thing that needs to be understood is the fact that wokeness in the video game industry these days is really just a branch off wokeness in general. Woke ideology has infected the mainstream media in general, not just the video game industry. So really, we're just looking at one component of a larger problem that needs to be understood in order to fully understand how everything came to be. Which is a pretty big deal because the effects of this propaganda can be seen pretty strongly in the poll.
I like how he's having Bomberman. It's like, what do we do with it? Well, we blow it up.
Hey,
for example,
Bomberman's
DEI
awesome.
initiatives are very unpopular with the general public. Most people do not actually like woke ideology. However, because propaganda tells people that DEI is good, people will say that they agree with DEI if they're asked if they agree with DEI and aren't giving anything specific. For example, a YouGov poll asked people if they were in favor of defunding all diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Most people opposed that. However, when people are asked if they actually support a policy specifically that happens to be a DEI policy, people overwhelmingly oppose it.
Yeah, but that's just people being asked in general, do you support helping people? It's like, yeah, well, how about spending more money in the budget to create this specific safety net? And they go, no, that's we don't need more money. It's like, well, then, okay, what are you talking? This is any argument regarding specific to general. So, whatever.
Well, yeah, this is a big tactic that they use, though, is they say this thing is the good thing and it will do the good thing. But once you realize what they're actually doing, you realize they're not doing.
You could argue that's what liberal-minded governments are doing, but this is just a survey asking people generic to specific, which doesn't really prove anything. It's just asking for, how about this detailed example? And then there's lots of people going to say no to that because that's not what they were thinking specifically. They were thinking in general in terms of, I want to help. It's like, yeah, of course you do.
For example, the poll found that most people believed it was a good thing that the Supreme Court banned race in college admission decisions, and by a pretty massive margin. And this is a pretty common theme. You ask people if they support DEI, and a lot of people will say yes, but then you ask those same people if they support a policy that is pro-DEI, and those same people will say no. This just kind of shows the silly effects of the propaganda we're seeing.
No, it's not propaganda.
In yes and no, because they're told that DEI is a good thing. But when asked about the specifics of it, they inherently know that that's a crappy thing. Like judging whether somebody should have it easier or worse getting into university based on race or sex.
Yeah, but that's just basic questions of any topic. It is not specific to DEI. Most people don't even know what DEI is.
Well, without exactly. If people hadn't ever heard of it at all through the propaganda that says DEI good, they would probably ask, what is that? And then they get the buzzwords, well, diversity, equity, inclusion, which all sound good, if you don't know what they actually mean. Because the way they're used, equity is a bad thing in the first place. But these other two, they definitely sound positive, and you can do positive things with them. But that's not what they're used for within what DEI actually does, which you see through the policies. And there is a similar effect that I've noticed over the years when you ask people about, well, do you think politicians are corrupt? Or is politics corrupt? Everybody will say, yes, of course. Then you ask them about specific parties, and you get a maybe, but you ask them about specific people, specific politicians, they will go into denial, like, you can't say that. You can't say that. Especially when it's, of course, politicians of their own, of the parties they vote for.
I find this line of argument he's making, or at least the way he displayed it, not very convincing. It's too generic, and yes, there are elements of we should help the poor, and then how do we do that? There's all these arguments to say how to do that. Sure, but pick any topic.
It's similar to. Well, are you for compassion? Yes. Oh, then you are a Christian. Now pay the tithe.
Yeah,
so
it's along those lines. Yeah, exactly. It's along those lines where the specific is not what they're referring to. It's fine, but it doesn't make a good argument.
Non-specific question, people are simply giving the answer that they are expected to say. This shows that many Americans in the West have been fooled into supporting DEI ideology without actually understanding what it is. This is a very typical sign of a population that has been...
Well, the thing with... you are right about that, Smart. The people who are to support DEI, it's mainly peddled towards organizations specifically, not to the broader public.
That would be such...
It always comes through the back door of wherever you work.
Yeah, it would be such a big like ISO 9000 thing that not even board members would know what the heck you're talking about. Like if I was voting on whatever quarterly return that like we introduced the same policies, the same people, like this would not even pop up in the vote. This would be something of an administrative thing, probably in middle management somewhere, not the high level. And even then it would be this weird policy change that everyone's like, yeah, whatever, who cares?
Yeah, and it's DEI is the ideological commissar that is not pushed to you through the state, but through the bait of we are going to totally improve your company with this. Your profits are going to be better, and it's for a better future and a better world. You want that. There's no reason to not want this. Now give us money. While the policies will actually destroy most companies.
I would have to see where that is introduced because it sounds too generic to me for the companies that I've worked for. Most of the companies that I work for, I know they adhere to whatever standards the government forces upon them, but that's it. Everything else is the industry. And unless the shareholders say something specific, this is too esoteric and specific to a certain company.
It's a snake oil salesman tactic, basically.
Yeah, I know, but where? I want to know where. Give me the example. Then I can say, okay.
Hasbro, Games Workshop, Blizzard, BioWare.
Yeah, but that's a games companies are very individualistic compared to
there was that scandal with that tractor company recently.
The tractor company?
TCS or something, American thing. And it turned out, because they're marketing to logically conservative people because it's farmers. But on the inside, they were already completely rainbow rotted. They was probably just waiting for an opportunity to turn that to the outside, to the surface. And that was uncovered recently, and then the tractor company, at least on the surface, paddled back on all of it.
Unless they're getting a tit for tat, like money or some sort of investment, I don't see how this works. Like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. But most people wouldn't know about it anyway, so I don't think they're being influenced in that regard.
Propagandized. It shows that there's a huge chunk of the population that has been tricked into thinking that they support something which they don't actually support. And where is that
but how would they?
Coming from? Well, the answer is...
How would they? Through these companies that they work at.
Yeah, but they're just buying a product.
You get your DEI sensitivity training, which is mandatory. No. That is basically a struggle session.
We're talking about individuals. And this is the genericness of the questionnaire that they would just randomly ask people. And they're going to keep buying whatever product because no one cares about the internal politics of the company.
No, but that's then a product of your DEI sensitivity training that you had at your job, which is supposed to brainwash you. That doesn't work with everyone,
that is
thankfully.
Only in regards to people who would work at a company at that level of that style of service or product they're making that would change procedures.
Everybody has to go to these things.
Not necessarily, no.
Well, that's the goal of it. Because they want to reach everybody, brainwash as many people as possible.
This is a very specific, I would say probably higher than middle management, like above that, but lower than the board. And it would have to be something along like an HR policy or a product specialist policy. Like how do we make a new service or product that would have these sorts of people involved.
It is through HR that these DEI trainings are being pushed onto the general workforce.
But the only people who'd be aware of that would be the actual workers of that company, not buyers or consumers of the service or product. So it's not it's not this big huge issue. It's just this very specific
Smart, you miss that it is not one company that does this. It is that they try to through all these HR departments, they try to do this through all companies that are susceptible to this.
Sure,
but can push this and thereby can push this on millions of people.
Yeah, but
that's the goal.
That's fine, but this is the same with any other HR department that has a stupid policy that they want to implement, like having a get together and talking with your group for culture building or corporate culture.
That's not. Yeah, that's what they call it. That's what they may call it, to improve corporate culture or something.
Yeah, but that's
in
what
the
I'm
end,
saying.
this is no different as if the HR department were pushing some religion, as if they were pushing Scientology or Nazism.
It doesn't have to be a literal company that has a BlackRock shareholder fitting the bill. It just could be any stupid policy in any company, right? That the HR department is trying to push. Or
why they're picking up this one specifically?
I don't know. It's I would literally have to go around asking all my old bosses, like, hey, what are you doing with this diversity hiring scheme? Like, what do you do? Is that a thing at your company? He's like, no, we could barely afford who we got. It's like, okay. So I don't know. It would have to be very, very big companies that are involved. So this is, again, very esoteric knowledge.
I would agree with that part. Like, with small businesses, this is, of course, nonsense. But everything that has, let's say, 50 to 100 employees
even then,
at minimum.
No, even then, like, we don't know. This is what I mean. Like, I know it's a thing. I know people have been talking about it, but unless you give me specific companies, then it's not as this big, gigantic thing as you think. It's whatever the people who have infiltrated the procedure handbook into these companies, then give me the handbook. Give me the examples, because I don't like this generic painting everyone.
Okay, you heard Smart. We need to compile lists. We need to be DEI detected outside of games and list all the companies that do this in every country. You heard him, Mentis.
Sure. we could say this about all kinds of dumb policies.
Go.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's an issue, but this is an issue with every organization. It's not just DEI. It's whatever the people up top think that hurts and hinder the operational behavior of everyone involved. So, anyway.
Is pretty much everywhere. It exists in Hollywood. It exists in cable TV news. It exists in our schools, as well as in higher education and academia. And it's really not all that surprising.
See, that academia, we know. We've known that for decades. That's fine.
Curtis Yarmouth of the Cathedral initially had nothing to do with the games industry, and was just
and it's been in schools because we've heard enough about kids that got not the cathedral opinion being reprimanded and sometimes being thrown off school even.
Yeah.
About academia as a whole. Oh, and it also exists in the law. Yeah, that's right. This is something a lot of people miss. The element of the state. You see, the reason the woke left tends to win culture wars and win on policy is because it's illegal for them to lose. Yep, that's right. A big portion of woke.
That is true.
I'm not sure what that means.
In Germany, that is true. Even though equity is anti-constitutional in Germany, because that's what the Nazis did, effectively judge people based on their worth and whether they should be taken from or given to, whether they should live or die, based on immutable characteristics like their race, their religion, and so on. That is exactly what equity does. And our constitution, part of the Human Rights Charter, has been written in response to that atrocious behavior. So mechanically, it is unconstitutional. But after the war, well, half the government is made up out of social democrats who claim, oh, we're totally not. People are what we call conveyor belt blind, workflow blind. You just keep going with what is, and you don't notice that, oh, wait, all this leftist stuff is actually unconstitutional and anti-human rights? Oh, well, that's a mess. How do we clean that up? So yeah, they have legal protections for this crap because they reinterpret the laws. Sometimes they can't change the laws by their words, but they try to change the interpretation of the laws, where we again get into this the esoteric definition of words that they use. That's the entire trick. It's all just games, definition games.
At the very least, a feature that they can very easily exploit. I've pointed this out before on my video on civil rights, but the TLDR of it is that the basis of woke ideology uses claims that unequal outcomes are discrimination in order to justify envy directed towards groups of people that have been disproportionately deemed as successful, by falsely accusing them of building their success off the exclusion of others. Despite the fact that this way of thinking is demonstrably untrue, as disparate outcomes do not actually prove discrimination, the ideology is already enshrined into law regardless. And this is absolutely perfect for the Marxist brand of wokeness. Marx's ideas of class consciousness and discrimination fit perfectly into this framework. And you can see this in Section 7, in proving discrimination or disparate impact, that the civil rights anti-discrimination laws can be abused by these woke cultists to be legally enforced purely based on unequal outcomes.
So he assumes everyone has class consciousness in a corporate structure? That's interesting.
Oh no, it's what they... No, the DEI stuff, especially the equity stuff and the intersectionality stuff, is all there to create a class consciousness. Those classes being artificial classes of race, sex, sexual orientation, and so on.
That is literally commie gobbledygook that most people would just laugh at.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm saying people would look at that and go, what is this crap? Like, that's not going to...
Yeah, smart. People who can reflect and think say what you just said. It's commie gobbledygook. It's nonsense.
Well, yeah,
and that is why we don't have 100% of people voting for that. Well, but there are a lot of people who are not thinking logically, rationally, but emotionally, and they are more easily captured by this.
Yeah, I just realized if they have a brochure or some sort of training manual or teaching method, people are going to go be like, "What the hell?"
Mainly people who never thought about any of this are most susceptible to falling for it, because then through primacy effect they get, oh, this is the first story I hear, so it must be true, and this is a smart person with authority, so it must be true.
I can see that happening. That's okay. Okay, fair enough.
That's the problem there. That's why this works on some people, but not all of them, thankfully.
Yeah, but when you hear that a Marxist term like class consciousness, you're like, okay, that's a bit far-fetched.
Yeah, but it's and the thing is, Marx himself, in his writing, said that, or was aware that, and even criticized the other socialists, that these things like race and such are not real classes. He saw the economic class, he saw the status within society. So these other things, even by Marx's standard, are artificial and not productive. They're doing something beyond Marxism, beyond Marx, by creating these artificial classes, because it is to create more division. And the whole economic thing doesn't work anymore. The whole worker movement thing, it goes nowhere. So they have to create new problems. So they play, and through this divide and conquer game of constantly creating new disparities between, here's this attribute of race or skin color or whatever else, and there's the haves and the have-nots. And you are definitely the have-nots, therefore you must be mad at the haves, and want to take away from them. So we get conflict, so we get crisis, and we need to create crisis because otherwise we can't get socialism. Because when everybody's fine and happy in a functioning economy, then we can't get the revolution. We only get the revolution if we have crisis. And Marx and Engels were very frustrated that their predictions about capitalism didn't come true, that instead everybody get richer. And so the revolution didn't come because there was no crisis coming. And that is why socialists after Marx and Engels always artificially create crisis in the hopes that it will bring them the revolution so that they can then instate full socialism, full control, to then build their whatever it is they want to build. It's madness. It's built on madness. And it requires malice because otherwise they can't get where they want to be. As Walsh said, it's not about being right, it's about winning.
All right, let's keep going.
If you read it and look at establishing disparity, you will see it written, a typical disparity measure involves a comparison between the proportion of persons in the protected class who are adversely affected by the challenged practice and the proportion of persons not in the protected class who are adversely affected. This is what the law actually says, and it is pure Marxist insanity. They can basically accuse any unequal outcome they see as being in violation of Section 7. This is one of the big things that enables woke consulting firms to go to a company, tell them that one of their practices is having an adverse effect on a protected class, and then effectively extort the company by telling them they need to pay the consultants for guidance on how...
Yeah, but what state is this? Can't be a federal law. That's kind of ridiculous. It would have to be specific to a certain jurisdiction. So it would be nice to know exactly where this is from.
It's not necessarily that. It's just that you can point to, oh, look, there's that law and that thing and that other thing, which isn't necessarily applicable here, but it's a clear guideline on what is good and proper, so you should listen to us.
Yeah, but it has to be specific to a jurisdiction. You can't just assume this is federal, which it isn't. So,
well, that didn't keep
effect via adopting DEI
that doesn't keep them from any other things they do.
Hiring diversity officers, or going back to the topic of video games, forcing inclusion and woke ideology into their story, or for major game journalist publications, only hiring journalists who hold correct trademark opinions. And then, of course, once Marxist activists fill the ranks of the HR department and diversity officers, they are then allowed to practice discrimination of their own, only hiring other people who subscribe to the Marxist ideas, which is another stupid thing about the way civil rights laws are enforced, as it's enforced by equity or equal outcomes, which is interesting because that doesn't actually stop discrimination. For the same reason that unequal outcomes do not prove that there is discrimination, equal outcomes don't necessarily prove that there is not.
In short, equity, to produce equity, it is required to discriminate because you have to tear people down in order to prop others up, or at least you have to tear people down to bring them all to the same level on the ground where they all suffer. Like that picture with the three guys trying to, illegally, without paying, watch some baseball game or something. Equity is not putting them all on boxes. It is sawing everyone's legs off until they're all the same height and all can't watch the game. Until they're all as short as the shortest guy. Nobody gets boxes. Or they can still have boxes, they still can't watch the game and they don't have legs anymore. That's it.
And you said to point out the law. The law is the Civil Rights Act, and it is a federal thing.
It is federal? Okay, great.
Because nobody can really prove that you're being racist, you're sexist in your hiring practices. It's really easy to claim it.
Activists HR department can discriminate against anybody who isn't also a woke activist, so long as they're sure to include an equal number of people from the protected classes. For example, they'll still hire white males, but only the ones that are fully indoctrinated with white guilt and woke ideology. This is a very important thing to understand about the extortion we see. But anyway, the point is that this gives legal backing to these consulting firms. They can not only threaten with bad press and not getting ESG funds, they can also, if push comes to shove, take things as far as an aggressive, frivolous, anti-discrimination lawsuit. Now, here's the thing, disparate impact has been the law for just over half a century, so the wokes have had this as a nail bat for which to aggressively force their ideology onto others for a very long time. And it's even worse for multinational corporations, in this case game publishers who wish to reach a global audience, because there are even more laws like this in other countries, and they have to abide by every single one of them. When you realize this, it suddenly becomes pretty obvious why it's so easy for the far-left activists to win, because they can just abuse the courts to crybully their way to victory if they need to. So what has happened as a result from this is woke activists have been able to slowly worm their way into the ranks of various institutions, from the state to academia to the media, and of course, video games, which is again, just one branch of the tree, and then subvert those institutions from within, increasing their ranks even further. And this is why it was more than just gaming that seemed to suddenly go woke crazy starting around the late 2000s. It infected everything from the education system to politics to Hollywood. If you think of culture as a pot and each of these components as frogs being slowly boiled, it makes perfect sense they would all die around the same time. So what we really saw happen around the 2010s is that these activists simply reached a large enough portion of the ranks to the point where they can effectively control society through a moral framework that they define and control. A very good example of this.
Did he say game journals started controlling society? Let me just rewind that.
No.
Around the 2010s,
No, the people who control
these
game
activists
journals
simply
control
reached a large
society.
enough portion of the ranks, frogs being slowly boiled, it makes perfect sense they would all die time. So what we really saw happen around the 2010s is that these activists simply reached a large enough portion of the ranks to the point where they can effectively control society through a moral framework that they define and control. A very good
Yeah, that's them as a whole, not just in games or through games. What this is the culture war working in unison with the great march through the institutions, which is this exact type of takeover. Get in, get enough numbers, get into key positions, take it over. What works as a bonus with that, once you get enough people grown up with your ideology, they do this naturally without needing instructions. So the first people who did this, they were doing it completely consciously. They knew what they were doing. And those that came after, through school indoctrination, through media bombardment, whatever, they just believed this is the right thing to do, so I'll do it. That's why I do it. And not doing it is bad, so I'm going to push everything that is pro this ideology that I believe in, maybe not even being conscious that it's an ideology, and the opposite I will keep out. And that is how it then naturally multiplies. And eventually you get to the point where enough of any institution, be that a ministry, be that a company, be that some hobby group, becomes this, just this. And everyone who's not compliant gets thrown out, and then you got your fascist society.
example of this abuse of civil rights laws can be seen in how they've gotten enough woketoids who have wormed their way into academia to have created an entirely new definition of racism that, interestingly enough, completely contradicts the colloquial definition of racism. Your average layman views racism as just ethnic prejudice, which logically concludes that ethnic collective guilt is at the root of the problem. However, in the cathedral-like definition, they use prejudice plus power to be the definition of racism, which logically concludes that collective guilt is a good thing. And here's where the gigantic grift comes in. These activists who have wormed their way into positions of power and influence will equivocate between these two definitions. They will imply that if you don't support their equity policies, then that means you must hate minorities and be a racist. But that doesn't make any sense. That's using both these definitions as if they are one. Because equity policies are based on the idea that collective guilt is good, which they are treating as exactly the same thing as simply ethnic prejudice, which views collective guilt as bad. Remember what I said?
This is what I meant before with they use esoteric definitions of things. And
Yeah,
here he says that they also spin it around when useful. Nick?
The term is double speak, right? Where they say one thing, but they mean another thing.
yeah, but
But they're perfectly fine you misinterpreting what you mean.
which layman even cares about the word collective guilt? Like, I'm trying to wrap my brain around who would actually be confused when learning of this word that it means what the other group wants it to mean. Like, just like, what? This is not something that people would consider.
Well,
No,
collective guilt would just be judging people based off of the actions of others just because they're similar.
I mean, he's just summarizing it So he uses the shortest words possible. That's usually how how Mentis makes his texts.
It's very specific term that I don't think anyone would consider outside of maybe a law program. Maybe. I'm trying.
Well, it's because collective guilt is actually illegal post World War II, at least in the Western world.
Yeah, no, I just this has never crossed my desk to read about or talk about. So, anyway.
Said earlier about how the general public will say that they agree with DEI only because they don't actually know what DEI is. Well, this is how. Because woke activists are not actually honest with what they believe. They know that their ideas are fundamentally unpopular, so they deliberately contradict themselves and obfuscate their ideology for the sake of optics.
I honestly don't think they're that intelligent. They barely know what they're talking about.
No, he's trying to explain the unconscious process that's going on.
Oh, come on.
And sadly, it's worked pretty well. People fall for this equivocation all the time. It's
because what I mean by that is there is always a logical process behind what people do, just that they're not always aware of what that logic is. But in the end, they seek internal consistency and they seek emotional balance, which means I want to feel good. I want to feel good about myself. Therefore, those people tell me what is a good thing to do, and then I'm a good person, and then I can feel good about myself. That's usually how the emotional reasoning works. That is not a conscious thing.
It's easy to see through it once you understand how it works. For example, if you watch someone like Ayanna Pressley talk for more than an hour, you'll pretty much see it at least a few times. But again, that's only if you know how it works. Which again, most people do not know because again, the woke activists have been infiltrating the education system for over 50 years. Were you taught how to spot Marxist equivocation fallacies in school? No? None of your teachers went over that? Yeah, exactly. Another big problem is cronyist financial systems like ESG. Environmental social governance is a topic that could use its own extremely long video, so I'll just go over the points that are relevant here. Problem with it is that it is an investment metric that uses diversity, equity, and inclusion as one of its metrics. Basically, it's just a way for people who bow down to DEI to get money. And the problem with that is that ESG is an example of cronyism. It does not actually get its funds from a voluntary exchange within the free market. Rather, instead, it is funded through a partnership between the state and very large private managers, such as BlackRock or Vanguard. The best explanation of this comes from the Mises Institute. The first hint that something is wrong is the fact that many of these companies who are going for these investments are motivated by government subsidies. This means that ESG is actually much worse than most people realize, because to some degree your tax dollars are actually paying for it. They're also motivated into ESG investing through regulation. The way this happens is quite complex. So here's a quick clip from a Mises podcast that explains the relevant bits.
The other thing that you see with these institutional investors and risk is that they say, well, one of the risks that we're trying to mitigate against is regulatory risk, and you should anticipate government regulations in these areas, and that's something that's risk to your business. And they're telling you that on the one hand, and then they go on the other hand with their lobbyists, and guess what? They're lobbying for regulations. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, you better watch out for these risks. Meanwhile, I'm going to pay all these lobbyists to try to make those risks a reality. So there's a lot of just underhanded activity going on at that level.
So, yep, as it turns out...
Yeah, but those two things are independent. They would still occur regardless of what one is doing to the other, if any. So
what if I deliberately force something into existence? That would naturally happen as well.
The government's going to put in regulations regardless, whether it's...
Yeah, but it's about specific regulations that you warn about to be guarded off, and by your product that you create deliberately. So you are creating the reason that other people should buy your product.
Yeah, but that's what government does. They create the problem and they band-aid the solution, or try to band-aid the solution. That's normal.
Yeah, but this is like, oh, I'm going to create a famine to make people vote for me by withholding the food. So that they can get the food if they vote for me.
That's an interesting example. But yeah, but this is, I mean, I've seen this in the liberal government for the past few years, like just recently with student lunches, that we introduced a public school lunch program because inflation is bad. It's like, yeah, what do you think caused inflation? So this is going to happen regardless, especially when money and subsidies are involved. There's always going to be catches to what you have to do to get it. Not specific to DEI, but it's going to happen anyway.
Without it's a big fat scam that tries to masquerade itself as legitimate investing, when in reality it's just political games. There's also an interesting study from Santa Clara Journal of International Law which concluded that government laws and regulations are the more likely driver of the boom in ESG investing, which is a particularly interesting study because it looked at more than just the United States, it also looked at various European countries. The extremely close ties to the state of large investment management companies like BlackRock further confirmed the suspicions that this kind of cronyist scam is definitely happening in backroom deals, with the relationship being so strong that BlackRock is often called a fourth branch of the United States government. A big one being how BlackRock is regularly hired to manage the assets of the Federal Reserve, effectively rendering them too big to fail, effectively ensuring that they will always have funds available at the backup of the Fed money printer go burr. These same firms then have a lobbying and revolving door relationship with the state, where they can partake in cronyism where they lobby for rules that directly benefit their investment strategy. And because they manage these assets, they also have direct command over how ESG...
That's pushing it. There's so many gigantic ETF companies. Vanguard is one example that have trillions of bucks invested in.
You wanted to bring in all the other examples into this chart?
Yeah, I know, but it's just...
And a lot of those other examples are going to be connected to BlackRock, too.
I'm sure because they're gigantic, they're connected to everything regardless. So
they don't just act directly, they also act indirectly.
Yeah, this is not saying anything.
Are you being paid by BlackRock, smart boy?
Am I being paid? No. I do own various shares in iSeries and not Vanguard. Actually, I do have some Canadian Vanguard. I have a UK Vanguard investment, but that has nothing to do with the argument.
Uh-huh.
I really don't. Honestly, I don't care what makes money. If it makes me money, I like it. I don't care about the ideology. So, no, this is. You could be talking about any policy. It doesn't make a difference to me. This chart means
now.
nothing.
I do think, if I recall correctly, Mantis, the guy who made the video, is ANCAP.
Oh, really?
So he'd probably agree with you that government is part of the problem.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could change the topic entirely and just talk about government, their tentacles and everything, and subsidies, or you get more of the same crap. So whatever social policy you put on top of that for your standards for an ISO is like, sure, but we should be talking about the actual standard. It's the problem. This has nothing to do with game journalism right here. This is the
free stories below the games journalism.
The
games journalism is on the stage further up that is influenced by this.
You could be
because this whole ESG scam it's snake oil.
Yeah, I know, but
through the state in order to push ideology.
I'm not saying,
and that is what kept Kotaku and so on alive.
I'm not saying this doesn't influence nothing. Obviously, billion or $1 trillion companies influence a lot, but if there's no connection between Jason Schreier from whatever he did when he was at Kotaku and TD Bank from 20 years ago, I who cares? Who cares who signs his checks?
Because the one who signs the check is the one who wants an ideology pushed and not the actual product, which is games journalism, and therefore we get propaganda and not games journalism.
Yeah,
and that's why we get propaganda in our games instead of good games.
Yeah, but you're talking about like 20, 30, maybe 70 degrees of separation. It's like, yeah, I'm sure there's something else involved in between all that.
I think it's pretty direct. If your company takes ESG money and on the contract as well, you have to do DEI now.
You're talking about a conglomerate, which is worldwide, like Vanguard or whatever, and then you're trying to translate that to an individual website that hires some Joe Blow from...
Well, on the individual level, they work towards it because they see that it earns them stuff.
They hire the people who will do the work for them.
This is no different to me than a political fad that might have come in 40 years ago. Now it's 10 years ago, or now it's 15 years ago, whatever it was. So
what I see is just the next stage after you got the hippie movement, then you got a pause. You got the feminist movement, you got a pause. You got the gay movement, you got a pause. And now we're here with the woke movement.
Yeah, and it's dying. It's slowly going away.
Yeah, but it's all coming from the same thing that's pushing it. It's all coming from the socialist ideology. And in this case, it has massive money behind it.
I'm not
because
saying...
the people who run BlackRock and Vanguard are socialists.
No.
Being a socialist doesn't mean that you're a poor guy who's caring for the poor. Socialists tend to be quite rich people. They don't just all come from nothing.
That is.
And another thing is that while DEI and stuff is failing, they're still trying to do other things to continue to influence.
If you want to talk about various countries that might be involved, like governments, fine. But we're talking about individual conglomerates who are completely dominating the S&P or the NASDAQ. Okay, sure. But it's not because of socialism.
It is.
No, it's not.
That's because socialism isn't about helping anyone. It is about creating control.
Okay, if you want to say conglomerates are in the business of controlling markets, that's fine. But you're talking about
What?
trillion-dollar organizations trying to...
That just gives them more power.
Okay, we're talking about two different things. Anyway,
if they have trillions of dollars, that means they have the actual power to push something like this the way they want. And thankfully, it all burned up. It's
and
in the
those
process
organizations
of up.
all have revolving door relationships with Congress.
well, the lobby group in the States is fascinating and huge and crazy, I admit. But whether you want to call these people socialists...
Lobbyers will take turns sitting in office.
Yeah.
And then they'll retire and they'll go and they'll start lobbying for these companies again.
Oh, that happens in Canada too. I mean, that's normal. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, but that's how it is. But to say these people are socialists or this somehow translates to game journalism or the products we get, this is too high level. This is too far.
Not all of them are socialists, but they're incentivized
Yeah, but
by
then we're just
socialists at the upper rungs to do this.
Then we're just handpicking what the argument is, and this is getting nowhere.
You have an overarching goal of reshaping the world in a certain image. And that's what you get in the WEF. That's what you get in Socialist International.
This is getting into conspiracy mumbo jumbo.
It's not conspiracy. These are factually existing organizations with factually stated goals.
When you start bringing up investment firms like Vanguard and all this other stuff, and you try to translate that into government subsidies, which are then only giving certain monies for millions of reasons. There's all kinds of grant programs and subsidy programs, and how you can get through those. This is like ESG is like one of thousands that do this. It is a thing, but it's not the biggest thing. It's not the only thing.
We also have a smaller thing in Germany where after our government in the 90s and 2000s completely scared the gaming industry out of the country and then realized, oh, this is the biggest media thing that ever existed, are now with tax money funding really stupid student projects that all go nowhere. And the more DEI compliant, the more woke they are, the more likely they get funding.
Yeah, but
none of these things make any sense.
Yeah, but
they're all avant-garde nonsense.
We're talking about journalism and gaming. We're not talking about energy or food production or gold or any of these other major industries. This is
but Smart. This is still.
But the ESG is in them as well.
I'm not saying it's not a part of it, but this is silly. We're talking about entertainment. We're not talking about weapons and farming and oil or policies related to energy.
But like West Austin says, destroying entertainment and making it political is part of their strategy.
Yeah, but
so that you can't escape from
there is a breaking point. Eventually, people are going to go, "This is crap," and no one's going to buy it, and then we're going to just buy something other stuff. That's why we have the indie scene.
But that's the point. That the attempt that doesn't it just because they don't succeed in it doesn't mean that's not the intent.
That's great, but
the intent is to destroy all culture so that only the ideology is left.
That's fine.
Sorry, Nick. Nick,
Yeah.
what were you saying?
I said the point was that eventually they want to hit a demoralization point where no matter how much of a breaking point you hit, nobody wants to stop it.
No one's gonna buy it.
Yeah, but the part of the goal of the demoralization and the lack of escapism is that you just accept that it is impossible to fight this, and you will just let it waltz over you, and accept the socialist world government hegemony.
All right. Well, I'm honestly very tired of watching this video. It's not very entertaining, and I don't know what the connection he's trying to make with these companies outside of they have policies. It's like, great. I don't.
We can let him finish the chart.
Fine.
Fund, which then controls the general market, of which, again, gaming is just a small part. The government then passes regulations and grants subsidies based on the ESG metrics, making it a self-fulfilling prophecy, which makes it look like ESG investments are a legitimate component of the free market to people who aren't paying full attention. You can think of it as them using private companies as a proxy for them to circumvent the Constitution. And then, of course, these laws directly control the market as well. While this is all an oversimplification, it is in a nutshell how the ESG scam operates. It is a deeply authoritarian system that tries to masquerade itself as a legitimate free market investment.
All right, that's enough. I think I've heard enough. Anyway, if you guys want to cover this tomorrow, we can, but this is enough for me for the day, and it's too much. This is my cynic radar is just firing like crazy. I can't take too much of this. So anyway, if you guys like this, we'll probably continue tomorrow. If not, please get a drink, relax, have some tea, whatever you do. Get some water.
I'll get a drink anyway.
Have a nap, whatever you do. It's a nice day. Anyway, thank you for your time. I'll talk to you guys soon.
What about
And,
the memes, dude? You're gonna miss
oh
what we have.
God,
we
what
haven't-
memes could you get from this? We've seen so many memes during the video. Like they were all disgusting.
Actually, never mind. There aren't any.
Oh, thank you. Thank God.
Thank God.
Good
Don't
Lord.
scare Smut like that.
What are you gonna have, like Bill Gates, like in his underwear or something? Oh shit, I want to see
Oh
that.
God, no.
Anyway, yeah, that was that, and thank God there's no memes. So we will talk to you guys later. Take it easy. Good night.
Yeah.